If ancient peoples were driven by caution and survival, always striving to avoid risk, then why do so many of their most mysterious constructions rise not in valleys of safety, but in the very realms where danger is greatest, poised on the lips of canyons, balanced along razor-thin ridges, and placed atop summits where lightning strikes first and storms gather without warning? What impulse drew them upward, compelling them to ascend where footing falters and winds roar, only to leave behind delicate rings of stone and faint alignments that seem too fragile for such wild heights? Were these places chosen for what they allowed people to see, the world stretched wide beneath them, or perhaps for what unseen forces or sacred presences were believed to watch from above? And if these high structures offered no refuge, no granary, no practical shelter or means of survival, then what need was so meaningful that it justified the climb? Every stone feels like a whisper across centuries, a question set in place rather than spoken, one that no answer has ever fully satisfied. Want to? On the northern rim of Chaco Canyon, where the mesa edge slopes gently toward open desert and wind travels without interruption across a flat expanse of sandstone dotted with juniper, stands the great house known as Pueblo Alto. It occupies its high position with restrained authority, its masonry foundations forming a constellation of rooms and open spaces arranged along the narrow shelf overlooking the canyon. The placement feels intentional, removed, observant, and poised above the landscape, as if designed to watch the rhythms of the valley below rather than participate in them directly. The building's layout reflects the architectural intelligence of the late 9th and 10th centuries. Coran veneer walls, carefully shaped sandstone blocks, and a geometric floor plan responsive to the uneven mesa surface, yet still consistent with the orderly logic of Chacoan design. Unlike the monumental great houses on the canyon floor, Pueblo Bonito and Chetroquetl among them, Pueblo Alto rises apart, elevated and exposed. From this vantage, the horizon unfurls toward distant mesas and plains, a wide view that has long encouraged scholars to consider visibility, mobility, and regional connectivity when interpreting its function. Excavations indicate that the site was not an isolated outpost but part of a broader Chacoan system, linked to surrounding communities through engineered roadways that meet near the base of the mesa. These roads, straight and deliberate in their orientation, cut across the desert in a way that implies planning on a regional scale rather than casual travel routes. Their proximity to Pueblo Alto suggests the great house may have served as a node for movement, gathering, or exchange, though archaeological evidence remains fragmentary. Tools, pottery, and faunal remains appear only in scattered traces, not enough to declare administrative or trade control with certainty. Yet the middens reveal unusually dense accumulations of ceramics, some locally produced and others imported from distant regions, hinting at episodes of congregation or material redistribution. Whether these moments represent ceremonial feasts, seasonal assemblies, or periodic trade remains unresolved. Architectural details add further nuance. Pueblo Alto stretches linearly along the rim, and sightlines extend from it toward other high points across the region. Some researchers have proposed that these visual connections formed a network for communication or symbolic alignment within the wider Chacoan cultural landscape. Direct evidence for signaling or coordinated observation is absent, but the possibility lingers. Meanwhile, the scarcity of large kivas, so prominent in canyon floor great houses, raises questions about ritual practice here. The few smaller subterranean rooms lack the scale and architectural elaboration of major ceremonial spaces, suggesting that if ritual took place at Pueblo Alto, it did so differently than in the canyon centers. Geological studies of the mesa emphasize ongoing erosion along its edge. Exposure to wind and weather has worn down walls and obscured ancient heights and roof lines, complicating reconstructions of how people would have seen the horizon through doorways or atop upper floors. Consequently, determining whether Pueblo Alto was engineered with astronomical sighting lines remains difficult. The broad horizon does invite observation of solar and lunar cycles, yet no unambiguous architectural devices for precise tracking have been identified. Scholars therefore treat astronomical interpretations as intriguing but not confirmed. Still, the cultural debris adds texture. Layers of crushed pottery, refloored plazas, and burn marks suggest episodes of communal activity, sometimes domestic, sometimes celebratory, sometimes ambiguous. The surrounding terrain deepens the picture. To the north, the mesa breaks into smaller canyons and ridges that bear evidence of scattered farming settlements, suggesting Pueblo Alto may have acted as a gathering point for these dispersed communities. To the south, the land plunges into Chaco Canyon, where great houses form an orderly nucleus contrasting with the rugged heights above. This spatial separation hints at deliberate planning, perhaps a complementary division of social or ceremonial functions between canyon floor and canyon rim. Yet contradictions remain persistent. The elevation implies oversight, but the artifacts do not clearly speak of governance. The pottery concentrations point to gatherings, but the nature and scale of those gatherings are uncertain. The converging road network implies importance, but its specific purpose is still only partially understood. Recent high-resolution mapping has revealed terraces, retaining walls, and pathways around the Great House, suggesting thoughtful modification of the mesa to accommodate movement and recurring visitation. Still, interior rooms hold few domestic installations typically associated with continuous occupancy, reinforcing the idea that Pueblo Alto was occupied intermittently, perhaps during agricultural cycles, trade events, seasonal pilgrimages, or ritual observances tied to the broader Chacoan calendar. Some scholars propose that the site served as a place of assembly and redistribution for people from surrounding settlements, a venue where relationships were reaffirmed and goods exchanged. Others suggest its elevated location carried symbolic weight within the cultural geography of Chaco, its high perch offering a conceptual counterpoint to the canyon's architectural heart. Without inscriptions or direct testimony, such interpretations remain open. What is certain is that Pueblo Alto embodies a blend of clarity and uncertainty. Its masonry binds it to the Chaco world. Its middens testify to concentrated human presence. Its location intersects roads, horizon lines, and regional movement. Yet its original purpose remains incompletely known, shaped as much by eroded absence as by what survives in stone. As wind continues to move across the mesa and new surveys refine measurements by degrees, Pueblo Alto persists, defined by its high desert surroundings as much as by its own architectural remains. It overlooks open plains, distant mesas, and the canyon below, standing within the enduring mystery of how Chacoans structured their landscapes, gatherings, and intentions across time and terrain. South Mountain. Along the long, wavering crest of South Mountain, overlooking the Salt River Valley in central Arizona, the desert heat shimmers upward from sun-bleached granite outcrops. The ridgelines roll gently toward a horizon softened by distance and light haze, where the low forms of ancient stone structures blend so closely with the natural bedrock that they reveal themselves only in certain angles of sunlight. In these moments, each wall stands apart from the random scatter around it, hinting not at grand monuments, but at a landscape shaped through quiet, persistent human interaction, deliberate construction expressed through subtle masonry rather than towering design. These features, low masonry enclosures, elongated walls, and occasional room-like rectangles formed from locally gathered metamorphic stone, occupy vantage points commanding expansive views of the valley below. From these heights, one could once survey agricultural fields fed by the Salt and Gila rivers, their patterns faintly echoed in the placement of ridge structures that resemble Hohokam hilltop sites established nearly a millennium ago. Archaeological surveys suggest that some of these formations served as seasonal lookout stations or temporary shelters, while others indicate spaces used for resource collection, small-scale social activity, or ritual observation. Yet interpretation remains cautious. The material record is sparse. Few artifacts, shallow midden deposits, and minimal evidence of sustained habitation. Many enclosures share orientations toward gaps between surrounding peaks, and some align loosely with solstitial sunrise or sunset positions, though inconsistency in wall angles tempers attempts to claim direct astronomical purpose. The masonry itself is modest. Small slabs, fractured naturally from the metamorphic slopes, were stacked without mortar, forming walls that today barely rise above knee height, though they may once have stood taller before centuries of erosion and human disturbance. South Mountain's geology complicates the picture. The eroded core complex produces abundant slab-like fragments, making intentional architecture hard to distinguish from natural talus unless stones appear in ordered clusters or linear sequences that contrast with the surrounding chaos. Within many structures, stone size and placement remain surprisingly consistent, forming arcs, rectangles, or gently curving enclosures that betray deliberate organization. Some researchers argue these may have belonged to a network of elevated Hohokam stations used to monitor weather, track seasonal rainfall patterns, or observe movement on the desert floor. Evidence for signaling or systematic observation is limited, however, and remains speculative. Others propose ceremonial dimensions. Ridgetop settings offer isolation, panoramic visibility, and psychological distance from the everyday life of canal-fed settlements below. Such spaces could have supported prayer, offerings, or ritual gatherings by individuals or small groups seeking spiritual engagement with the desert. The pattern of site distribution adds complexity. Structures cluster along certain ridges, yet remain absent from others of similar prominence, suggesting shifting cultural priorities, episodic use, or differences in accessibility and resource focus across time. Some clusters correspond to saddles or natural trail routes ascending the mountain, implying nodal points in movement networks. Others occupy high knobs overlooking drainages once used by desert bighorn sheep or mule deer, raising the possibility of hunting blinds or strategic vantage points. Archaeological testing has revealed scattered flakes, small patches of charcoal, and fragments of classic period Hohokam pottery, enough to assert presence but not permanence. The absence of storage pits, hearth complexes, or significant refused deposits reinforces the idea of intermittent use and activity-specific occupation rather than settlement. Environmental forces have further obscured original form. Extreme temperature swings, heavy monsoon runoff, and winter winds dislodge stones and erode shallow soils, gradually lowering wall heights and altering edges. Some walls follow the natural contour of ridges, while others cut across slopes at angles that seem purposeful, perhaps marking space, directing movement, or framing specific views. But these possibilities, though compelling, remain largely inferential. Ethnographic parallels among O'odham and other regional communities emphasize mountains as loci of power, transition, and perspective, places to gain spiritual orientation or connect with wider worlds. While such traditions cannot be directly mapped onto earlier Hohokam architecture with certainty, the ridgetop settings and immersive desert vistas invite symbolic interpretation that complements practical explanations. Contradictions persist. Structural forms vary widely: compact rooms, open arcs, elongated linear walls, defying simple typological categories. Some ridges contain dozens of features, others nearby hold only one or two. Recent surveys using aerial imaging and on-foot documentation continue to expand the known distribution of these features, yet they also introduce the challenge of distinguishing ancient constructions from later disturbances, such as historic mining traces or modern trail work. What emerges most clearly is not a singular function, but a layered landscape of adaptation, one in which elevated ground offered visibility, orientation, and meaning within a desert world calibrated to cycles of water, horizon light, game movement, and social connection. For all the suggestive patterns, the evidence is fragmentary, shaped by erosion, minimal habitation signatures, and the ephemeral nature of short-term occupation. Thus the ridge structures of South Mountain endure as quiet inscriptions of human presence on high stone. Their low walls and faint alignments interact subtly with sun, shadow, and desert silence. Weather continues to erode them, but the intention behind their stones persists. reminding us that even the most humble architecture can maintain a long conversation with the land, leaving traces that beckon interpretation yet never fully surrender their story. Mesa Verde's Sun Temple stands on the sun-bleached mesa top above Cliff Palace, where the sandstone rim lifts into a broad plateau brushed by wind and open distance. It does not rise through height, but through design, a D-shaped footprint, thick masonry walls, and a geometry so intentional that it commands attention more through order than monumentality. Below, the alcove dwellings cling to shadowed cliffs. Here, the builders chose the sky, a place removed from domestic rhythm, positioned not for shelter, but for vision. The path across the mesa is gentle, the reveal slow. Only when one draws close does the craftsmanship emerge. Stone blocks fitted with the precision and confidence characteristic of late Pueblo III masons, their work speaking of community, planning, cooperation. Radiocarbon suggests a late 12th or early 13th century construction, a time when labor still gathered into shared purpose, even as pressures on the region mounted. Yet unlike the warm, lived-in rooms below, the Sun Temple carries no trace of habitation. No hearth ash, no refuse, no food storage, only walls framing an open central court, where orientation begins to hint toward meaning. To the east, the La Plata Mountains lance the skyline. To the west, the mesa falls into juniper and piñon, fading toward evening sun. Across this horizon span, many researchers have noted possible solar relationships. Solstice sunrise, solstice sunset, subtle, suggestive, never exact enough for certainty. The twin circular rooms nested in the D shape, often called towers, deepen the puzzle. Their thickness, raised doorways, and finished interior surfaces imply importance beyond everyday use. Yet the absence of narrow viewing slots or engineered sightlines complicates the astronomical theory. Early 20th century excavations uncovered pecked stone faces and sockets that may once have held wood. Screens, platforms, beams, features now ghosts in the masonry footprint. The double-coursed walls with rubble core mirror the finest work at Sun Point and Oak Tree House, evidence of skilled hands and intentional effort. A building for people to gather, to watch, to mark time, or simply to stand together beneath the sky. But interpretation fractures at every turn. Alignment hints but does not declare. The form invites ceremony but hides its function. A vantage, yet not a laboratory of light. Some propose it served agricultural ceremonial roles, overseeing the community below, perhaps marking seasons essential to crop cycles. Yet the absence of kivas, central to ritual architecture across the region, casts shadow on that idea. Others propose incompletion, a grand project left unfinished as drought, migration, and social strain reshaped Pueblo life in the 13th century. But the masonry's polished finish suggests completion of at least the intended stage. Geological mapping shows the structure rests on a stable sandstone cap, far from the erosional alcoves below, an intentional choice, one of permanence and visibility. Recent instrument mapping reveals a slight deviation from cardinal orientation, subtle enough to suggest alignment not to abstract north-south grids but to local horizon markers, mountain peaks, light events, seasonal shadows. In certain months, dawn touches the La Plata range in a beam visible from the temple court. Did the builders watch that moment? Or is the overlap coincidence? The site refuses certainty. The temple lacks roofing remains, height is unknown. Yet the walls show finishing marks, smoothing care, too refined for storage, too open for residence. A place meant to be experienced, not lived in. And this absence, no ceramics, no tools, no ritual offerings, makes the structure defined as much by what is missing as by what endures. Cliff dwellings preserve stories through grinding stones, fire soot, plastered walls. The Sun Temple preserves only outline and silence. Some scholars argue it may have served briefly, a generation or less, before population shifted southward. If so, the faint archaeological signature becomes less surprising. Even so, the design's symmetry, balanced interplay of circular and rectangular forms, and strategic siting speak to meaning once understood deeply. a function not trivial, not improvised. The mesa around it is traced faintly with ancient roads and smaller structures, paths like arteries leading to this point. A node, a meeting place. Yet as paths converge, so do ambiguities. Observation, ceremony, social council, seasonal gathering, a monument to presence. The Sun Temple gestures toward all possibilities without surrendering itself to any single one. And so it remains, a geometric imprint of intention, shaped by hands who read the sky and stone differently than we do now. A structure that persists because it refuses clarity, because it preserves a space between interpretation and unknown. In the vast open light of Mesa Verde, the Sun Temple stands not as a solved equation, but as a continuing question, an architecture of purpose withheld, where sandstone and horizon meet and meaning slips just beyond reach, enduring in the quiet that surrounds it. Chimney Rock Observatory sits high upon a razor-edged ridge above the Piedra River Valley in southern Colorado, where steep ribs of ancient sandstone rise abruptly from the basin, and the horizon seems to press close against the sky. The location is so narrow and elevated that at times it feels as if one walks a path suspended between earth and atmosphere. Along this dramatic crest, a series of masonry rooms and low-wall remnants stretch toward the two towering sandstone pinnacles that define the site. These twin spires, stark and commanding, form both the visual anchor and the lingering question that has captured researchers and visitors for generations. At first glance, approaching the site from the ridgeline, the architecture appears modest. Foundations of Chacoan-style rooms dating to the 11th century, their walls weathered down to outlines. Yet as one advances, the orientation of the great house toward the narrow gap between the rock towers becomes increasingly apparent. That subtle directional pull, once noticed, is difficult to ignore, hinting at a deliberate dialogue between structure and skyline. For decades, scholars have examined this alignment, drawn particularly to the way the gap frames celestial movement. The leading hypothesis proposes that the great house was aligned to the major lunar standstill, the rare event that occurs roughly every 18.6 years when the moon reaches its farthest northern or southern horizon extremes. Observers note that during this period the moon, from the vantage of the great house, appears to rise or set between the twin spires in striking fashion. The visual effect is compelling enough that lunar observation is often considered central to the site's interpretation. However, archaeologists stress caution. Differences in ancient vegetation, roof height, and structural completeness make it difficult to determine exactly how controlled that view was in the past. The possibility remains strong, but not certain. Architecturally, Chimney Rock exhibits characteristic Chacoan traits: Coran-veneer masonry, carefully shaped sandstone blocks, rectangular rooms consistent with regional great houses, suggesting participation in the broader Chaco cultural sphere. Yet its placement at extreme elevation, exposed atop a windy ridge rather than in the protected valleys typical of Chacoan centers, sets it apart. Excavations have yielded domestic debris, hearths, manos, metates, and refuse pits, indicating that people lived and worked here, though not continuously. The occupation pattern suggests episodic or seasonal use rather than a permanent settlement, reinforcing theories that the ridge served ceremonial or event-specific gatherings tied to time, season, or sky. Geological surveys reveal that the pinnacles themselves are natural erosional remnants, sculpted from resilient sandstone layers that resisted the weathering that lowered the surrounding rock. Long before rooms were built, the spires must have dominated the view, a natural axis around which human meaning could gather. Some researchers argue that builders intentionally incorporated this pre-existing landmark, transforming landscape into architecture. Whether this was for astronomy, symbolism, or both is still debated. Although the ridge offers exceptional views of solar and lunar cycles across the horizon, the architecture lacks engineered sighting channels or precise apertures expected of a fully intentional observatory. This absence tempers the idea of strict astronomical function, though it does not dismiss sky watching as a component of site use. The vantage is breathtaking, To the west, the San Juan Mountains rise in rugged silhouettes. To the east, the Piedra Valley drops away in layered terraces, and at the center of everything the Twin Towers stand like stone gatekeepers. The setting naturally encourages attention to horizon events, the slow arc of seasons, the shifting moon, the flare of solstice sun, making it plausible that ceremonies synchronized with celestial cycles could take place here. The 11th century construction date aligns with the expansion of Chaco influence northward, placing Chimney Rock near the far edge of the cultural network, possibly functioning as an outpost, pilgrimage destination, or interface between local groups and distant centers. Yet evidence remains complex. While the lunar standstill alignment is visually persuasive today, reconstructed wall heights imply that the ancient view may have been broader or more obscured than it now appears. Such uncertainty opens space for alternate interpretations in which symbolism, territorial signaling, or sensory engagement with the dramatic ridge environment may have been as important as lunar tracking. The domestic remains suggest a lived-in space where cooking, storage, and routine activities occurred, perhaps during festivals or gatherings connected to larger ceremonial calendars. Pueblo ethnographic parallels emphasize that high places and distinctive rock forms often hold layered meanings, spiritual, social, and astronomical fused rather than separated. Other scholars point to the ridge's wide observational sweep, which includes multiple horizon points for both sun and moon throughout the year, suggesting a more general skywatching role rather than one centered solely on the standstill. Meanwhile, the site's isolation and architectural investment may indicate a symbolic claim to landscape, marking Chacoan presence on its northern frontier. Excavations on surrounding slopes have uncovered additional small rooms, middens, and pathway traces, hinting at a broader complex and community beyond the ridgetop Great House. Still, the pattern remains intermittent, periods of busy habitation followed by quiet absences, which fits with ceremonial or seasonal use, but does not confirm it. The twin pinnacles themselves rise nearly 300 feet, their shadows sliding across the ridge through the day, altering the atmosphere in subtle but powerful ways. Such sensory elements, scaling cliffs, wind across stone, moon framed in rock, are difficult to measure archaeologically, yet likely central to how the place was experienced. If ceremony occurred here, it may have intertwined architecture, landscape, and sky into an integrated performance of place. And just as alignments invite speculation, so too do the silences. No carved markers, no explicit inscriptions, no artifacts that name the ritual purpose directly. What remains is a mosaic of clues: architectural orientation, domestic traces, geological spectacle, astronomical possibility. None definitive alone, yet collectively evocative. In this balance of evidence and mystery, Chimney Rock Observatory endures, part great house, part natural shrine, part sky-facing stage. Stone towers, Chacoan walls, and open air meet here at the boundary of certainty, inviting interpretation without surrendering all answers. Each new survey redraws details and refines measurements, yet the essential ambiguity persists. The site holds enough structure to imply intention, but enough openness to let imagination follow the moon between the spires. And as the ridge continues to stand against time, the same questions rise with it. What its builders saw in the sky, what they sought on the mountain, and how the dance of architecture and landscape once shaped meanings now partially hidden in wind and stone. High on a wind-scoured spur of the Teton Range, where the granite ribs of the mountains press into a sky thinned by altitude, cold, and a kind of sacred quiet, the site known simply as the Teton Enclosure rests with a subtlety that makes it easy to overlook, yet strangely difficult to forget once noticed. It lies low against the tundra, a ring of rough stone alignments so modest and weathered that they feel less built than grown, as if patience rather than force coaxed them into form. They are the first whisper that people once climbed to this improbable height with purposes beyond travel or chance wandering. The approach reveals nothing at first, only wind, boulder fields, the dry rasp of alpine grass. But as one steps into the rocks, shapes begin to emerge. Angles soften into arcs, randomness leans toward intention, and the enclosure's quiet geometry becomes unmistakable. Archaeologists have long pointed out that the stones do not resemble the chaotic scatter left by frost heave or glacial dump. Instead, their placement, delicate but deliberate, echoes other high-altitude vision quest sites across the northern Rockies. It is a clue made not of artifacts but of pattern, hinting that ritual, solitude, and endurance once met here. And yet certainty is elusive. At over 10,000 feet, snow, lightning, and centuries of freeze, thaw cycles erase minor traces with relentless efficiency. What survives is the relationship between stone and horizon. The enclosure opens westward toward the wide basin, where the Snake River splits and reunites, a river glittering like threads of mercury across Wyoming's long distances. From this vantage, storms crawl across the plains in slow and luminous curtains, while late summer light briefly gilds the cliffs of the southern Tetons as if by design. Whether intentional or coincidence remains unknown, but the effect is unmistakable. This is a place built for looking outward or inward or both. Some propose it was a lookout or hunting blind, but its exposure argues otherwise. No hearth, bone scrap, or domestic debris anchors it to habitation. Others turn toward cultural memory, ancestral Shoshone high mountain practices of solitary ascent, fasting, and prayer. In that context, the enclosure becomes less shelter than threshold, a liminal room where one person could kneel out of the worst wind and wait for meaning in sky and silence. Geological studies have tried to ascribe the arrangement to natural slides, but the uniform stone size and soft curving arcs contradict glacial logic. Human hands remain the simplest explanation. Dating remains uncertain. Lichen growth suggests age, centuries perhaps, but radiocarbon hope is thin in a world made of rock and absence. When surveyed carefully, the structure reveals small eccentricities. Its long axis is almost but not quite aligned to ridge or solstice. Such almost stir questions. Were the builders gesturing loosely toward celestial events rather than marking them with precise astronomical intent? Compared to other high sites aligned sharply to sunrise or to revered peaks, the Teton enclosure stands near the pattern but never inside it. It invites comparison, then resists it. Inside the ring there are no pits, no fire scars, no midden. Only a leveled patch where wind slackens enough for a person to sit, think, wait. The climb required to reach this place, to push through thin air, talus slopes, snowfields, implies intention. No one arrives here casually. If the site was used, it was used for purpose, brief, personal, and possibly profound. Modern researchers have noted how the enclosure frames specific features at certain hours, how weather and light become part of the architecture itself. Afternoon storms sweep the basin long before they strike the ridge, offering watchfulness as experience. The possibility that ancient visitors saw similar play of season and shadow is unprovable, but not unreasonable. Yet contradictions persist. Some stones look toppled, others gently reset, as if rearranged across decades or centuries by different hands. Without pottery, tools, or charcoal, affiliation dissolves into possibility. One theory suggests layered use. Many peoples, many eras, each leaving arrangement more than artifact. A palimpsest of intention, rather than a single clear story. If true, such slow accretion would explain the misalignments and irregularities, change written into stone by time, culture, and glacier wind. But the idea, like all others here, rests on inference. What is constant is place. A ridge that gathers thunderheads in summer and ice in winter. A boundary where ecology thins and human presence becomes deliberate, almost ceremonial by necessity. To stand within the enclosure is to feel a small windbreak, a low cradle of stone inside an amphitheater of peaks. Sound falls away. The mountains lean close. One notices how little is required for meaning. Just a ring of stone, a view, a stillness carved out of weather. Interpretation becomes personal, unsealed. The Teton enclosure holds its ambiguity the way it holds its rocks, lightly, enduringly. It neither confirms nor denies vision quest, observatory, refuge, nor watch post. It offers instead a form of patience. a structure shaped by humans but inseparable from mountain and sky, a place where answers are carried less in stone than in experience. Each survey refines, each hypothesis circles, but the site remains quiet, withholding. Its endurance lies not in clarity, but in the way it keeps its questions intact, as if purpose was meant to be felt more than known. Carried up the mountain, lived in wind and horizon, and left in stone for others to wonder. Across the windswept reaches of Cedar Mesa Ridge in southeastern Utah, where labyrinths of deep sandstone canyons carve through broad, juniper-dotted uplands, the landscape unfolds into a mosaic of plateaus, terraces, and knife-thin ridgelines. Upon these elevated spines, ridge shrines emerge quietly yet purposefully. Small stone circles, low cairns, and deliberate alignments of rocks settled along fractured cliff edges and jutting promontories. They sit in places where the mesa suddenly breaks away, plunging into the coiling shadows of Grand Gulch or into the wider tributaries that eventually feed the San Juan River. Subtle enough to disappear into the natural scatter of sandstone fragments, yet unmistakable when recognized, their intentional geometry hints at long histories of human presence, moments of pause, ceremony, or orientation, rather than settled life. Artifacts are sparse. The high ground yields only the occasional flake or potsherd, the residue of travelers who cross these ridges briefly, without dwelling long. Cedar Mesa's geology, a crown of ancient wind-formed dunes now petrified into cross-bedded cliffs, creates vantage points where sightlines radiate like spokes of a wheel across tens of miles. Many shrines occupy locations where panoramas open toward the Bear's Ears, the Abajo Mountains, Comb Ridge, or the far silhouettes of Monument Valley. Their placement suggests intention, though purpose remains elusive. Some lie mere inches from sheer precipices, stones curved in graceful arcs as if framing the abyss beneath. Others cluster near natural saddle points where narrow ridges concentrate movement, implying that shrines could have guided travelers, anchored ritual circuits, or marked contemplative thresholds on the high mesa. Archaeology on the canyons below has been extensive, but the mesa top remains lightly explored, its shrines mostly recorded rather than excavated. Dates are inferred from context, ceramic scarcity, architectural weathering, more than empirical data. Many features appear to have been visited episodically, perhaps across several cultural eras, from early basket maker periods to later Pueblo societies, though definitive assignment remains beyond reach. Weathering tells its own story. Some circles sag into the soil, their edges softened by centuries of wind-driven sand. Others retain clear outlines, as if renewed over generations. A handful exhibit leveled interiors or raised central clusters of smaller stones, configurations reminiscent of mesa top offering places elsewhere in the region. Yet without perishable offerings, no conclusion is certain. Below these ridges, tucked in alcoves and canyon bends, lie cliff dwellings, granaries, and panels of rock art, forming a vertical chain of use. Daily habitation in the canyons, storage just above, and ritual or symbolic features on the heights. This stacking may reflect a rhythm of life that linked the spiritual world with the domestic, though such relationships are now obscured by time. Some researchers suggest shrine locations were observational stations, where watchers tracked storm patterns, monitored seasonal water flow, or marked solstice light over notched horizons. Others imagine ceremonial routes, pilgrims ascending from canyon settlements to ridgeline sanctuaries during pivotal times of year. Yet evidence is too thin for certainty. Ethnographic accounts from descendant communities emphasize the sanctity of high places and the long tradition of offerings left along ridgelines. However, these insights cannot be applied wholesale to the ancient past without risking overprojection. Natural processes complicate interpretation further. The mesa endures severe winds, monsoon torrents, and relentless freeze-thaw cycles. Stones creep downslope, soils erode, cairns slump. Some shrines appear truncated, upper tiers gone, leaving only their foundations, while others remain unexpectedly intact, preserved by bedrock shelves or sheltered folds in the terrain. Even lichenometry, sometimes used to estimate age, falters here. Growth varies dramatically with shade, moisture, and exposure, defying broad chronological application. Yet mapping continues. High-resolution aerial imagery and precise GPS surveys now reveal an expanding catalog of features once overlooked. Stone rings faded into the color of the earth, visible only when the eye learns to discern intention from accident. The accumulating data suggests that ridgeline shrine building may have been widespread, shaping Cedar Mesa into a layered cultural landscape where farming terraces, habitation zones, travel corridors, storage alcoves, and ceremonial viewpoints coexisted in vertical dialogue. Still, the core questions remain suspended in ambiguity. Were these shrines primarily personal retreats, markers for the traveler, collective ceremonial spaces, or astronomical frames for sun and star? Did their orientations hold encoded meaning, or simply mirror practical familiarity with the land? Does the distribution reflect a unified tradition, or centuries of varied practices stitched loosely across time? In this blend of evidence and silence, the shrines persist, subtle, wind-softened signatures of human presence. They remain poised along the sandstone ridges, shaped by intention yet weathered into anonymity, offering only glimpses of ancient engagement while withholding final answers. Their stones continue to converse with sky and canyon, part of the mesa's continuous exchange between landscape, memory, and the faint but enduring trace of those who once paused here, leaving behind shapes that still hold meaning even as they refuse to fully speak it. High on the northern Wyoming heights, close to the windswept crest of Medicine Mountain, where the ridgeline thins into a narrow limestone spine carved by frost, wind, and unrelenting winter storms, lies the Bighorn Medicine Wheel. It rests with a stillness that feels intentional, as if it has settled into the earth not merely by gravity, but by purpose. The pale stone circle stretches roughly 80 feet across the fragile alpine grass, its form so rooted to the mountaintop that it appears grown rather than built. From the central cairn, 28 stone spokes extend outward like quiet rays, carefully arranged yet subtly imperfect, softened by centuries of exposure and perhaps the hands of many who tended, altered, or reinterpreted it over generations. One approaches it slowly, breath thinning in the high air as the horizon widens and distant country unfolds in grand views. The Bighorn Basin sweeping to the east, the Absaroka Range rising rugged to the west. Long before the stones become distinct, the openness of sky and land imparts a sense of reflection and presence, as if the landscape itself prepares the mind to see differently. Archaeology proposes that the wheel assumed its current shape several hundred years ago, though some features, particularly the central cairn, may be older. Layers of use and rebuilding blur the timeline, making it difficult to assign the structure to a single cultural moment. Alignments connecting certain cairns with the solstice sunrise and sunset have sparked fascination, along with sight lines that may relate to heliacal star risings significant in Plains astronomy. Yet such observations, while compelling, rest more on pattern recognition than definitive evidence. Scholars remain cautious, noting irregular spokes, natural stone drift, and the likelihood that alignments may be symbolic rather than mathematically calibrated, cosmology expressed through ritual form rather than through precision instruments. Ethnographic links tie the site most closely to Northern Plains tribes, especially the Crow, who regard the mountain as a place of prayer and spiritual ceremony. But oral traditions, while affirming the sacredness of circular forms and high places, do not clearly name the wheel's original makers. Instead, they hint at a landscape shared over long stretches of time, where meaning passed between communities, adapting without erasing what came before. Archaeological study reveals no evidence of quarried stone or shaped blocks. The rocks were gathered locally and placed with care, forming a pattern unmistakably human, yet harmonizing with the natural scatter of the ridge. The absence of pottery, tools, or domestic debris supports the idea that the wheel was never a dwelling site, but a destination for ritual gatherings, seasonal offerings, individual quests, and sky-oriented observance, practices focused on experience rather than material remains. The 28 spokes invite interpretations, lunar cycles, social divisions, ceremonial paths, yet their subtle asymmetry complicates attempts to impose exact symbolism, suggesting incremental construction or periodic realignment. Over time, storms, frost heave, and drifting snow may have shifted smaller stones, blurring original intentions while leaving the overall design intact. 6 peripheral cairns positioned around the outer ring contribute further intrigue, interacting with distant peak lines and horizon dips in ways that might once have carried meaning now partially forgotten. Whether those alignments mark specific celestial events or relate instead to ritual movement, territorial orientation, or mythic directionality remains uncertain. Modern attempts to decode such connections run up against the limits of evidence, reminding us that ancient interpretations may not mirror our own. Geologic studies show that Medicine Mountain's summit has changed little over millennia, stable enough to preserve layout, yet harsh enough to continually rearrange loose surface stones. The result is a structure both permanent and fluid, major cairns enduring like anchors in time, smaller stones shifting subtly with weather and human touching. Some researchers propose the wheel served as a place of preparation for vision quests, where solitude, thin air, and an immense arc of sky helped seekers move between everyday life and the spiritual realm. Yet without direct archaeological proof, such ideas remain informed possibilities rather than established fact. Others emphasize the mountain itself, the way storms sweep across the basin, the sudden rise of thunderheads, the play of light at sunrise and last dusk, arguing that the wheel may function less as a precise instrument and more as a point of orientation within a vast ceremonial landscape. Historical accounts describe indigenous visitors maintaining the site, resetting stones displaced by winter or leaving small offerings. Such acts of care affirm enduring meaning, even as specific traditions evolve. For researchers, this continuity complicates efforts to distinguish original features from later modifications, but it also underscores the wheel's living significance, a monument not frozen in time, but continually engaged with spirit and memory. Mapped today, the wheel forms a coherent geometry, clear in intent though never rigidly exact. It carries a balance that invites neither casual dismissal nor exaggerated claims, ordered enough to signal deliberate construction, weathered enough to hold ambiguity and depth. Like many sacred high-altitude structures, the Bighorn Medicine will exist in a space between certainty and wonder. It offers enough archaeological grounding to confirm its human origin, yet enough mystery to resist complete interpretation. In this meeting of stone and sky, planning and erosion, cultural inheritance and natural force, the wheel stands as a threshold monument, neither solved nor unknowable. Its spokes reach outward like markers of seasons long observed, its circle remains steady against shifting winds and snows, and the mountain beneath it carries the larger question of why people across time climb to heights where the world expands outward and reflection turns inward, all under a sky that feels close enough to touch. Ute Mountain. Across the broad, sleeping mass of Ute Mountain in southwestern Colorado, where the outline of the range settles unmistakably into the profile of a reclining figure. The high ridges are marked by summit shrines and scattered stone enclosures. These modest rings, cairns, and small alignments rest quietly among weather-worn sandstone shelves and slopes dotted with juniper, situated in places where wind gathers and the horizon opens into long, unbroken distances across the Four Corners region. The topography of the mountain, steep volcanic intrusions, narrow backbone ridgelines, and broad, flattened knolls, creates a sequence of elevated platforms that feel at once protected and exposed. And upon these platforms the shrines appear in patterns that initially seem accidental, only slowly revealing distributions hinting at intention shaped by ceremonial or spiritual engagement rather than everyday habitation. Archaeological work, challenged by rugged terrain and a sparse material record, has documented a variety of small features. Circular stone outlines only a few meters wide, solitary cairns built from local sandstone or igneous cobbles, and occasional linear arrangements that follow natural contours before diverging just slightly, introducing questions about why they were placed exactly where they stand. Most lack datable artifacts or domestic debris, implying episodic visitation rather than permanent settlement. The mountain's significance in Ute oral tradition is profound, yet these stories do not directly identify the builders or specify the precise uses of the archaeological traces, leaving a space where cultural memory and material evidence touch one another only lightly. Sleeping Ute Mountain is composed of laccolithic intrusions uplifted millions of years ago, producing abundant loose stone that makes it necessary to distinguish intentional construction from natural scatter by looking closely at selection, orientation, and repeated form. Many shrines exhibit a coherence of size and alignment that diverges subtly but unmistakably from random accumulation. Some sit directly upon high ridge crests overlooking drainages where seasonal water once supported vegetation. Others rest on terraces just below the summits, positioned as though chosen for seclusion, partial view, or refuge rather than sweeping vantage. A few cairns align toward distant landmarks, Hesperus Mountain to the east, Ship Rock rising like a sentinel to the southwest, and the Mesa Verde escarpment to the north. Yet the alignments are broad, not exact, more suggestive of symbolic orientation or relational awareness than precise astronomical observation. The regional prominence of the mountain would have made it a powerful reference point for multiple cultural groups across centuries, and the shrines may represent layered histories of visitation rather than one continuous tradition. Some archaeologists suggest these high elevation features may have been stations for vision-seeking or personal ceremonial practices known among various indigenous cultures across the region. Interpretations based more on placement and setting than on artifacts. Others propose that certain clusters could have marked boundaries or territories at mountain passes or trail intersections. Yet many shrines lie on difficult ridges accessible only with effort, complicating the idea that practicality alone dictated placement. Environmental exposure adds further ambiguity. High winds, extreme temperature swings, freeze, thaw cycles, and slow erosion displace stones over time, obscuring original dimensions and layout. Some enclosures now appear collapsed, their stones scattered downslope, while others remain surprisingly intact, the low rings retaining a sense of deliberate arrangement that implies careful construction and little later disturbance. The scarcity of organic remains limits radiocarbon dating, and even lichenometric approaches struggle due to variable growth rates across microclimates. Still, subtle clues persist. Some shrines show interior leveling as if the ground was flattened for sitting or ritual use. Others emphasize cardinal points with slightly larger stones or open toward specific bearings, details that may signal cosmological intention or ceremonial organization. The relationship between shrine distribution and the mountain's distinctly human-shaped profile introduces another layer of inquiry. Seen from surrounding valleys, Sleeping Ute Mountain resembles a reclining person with head, torso, arms, and legs, a form recognized in regional oral tradition for generations. Whether shrine builders consciously referenced these human features, or whether later cultural interpretation attached meaning to older constructions, remains uncertain. A number of shrines cluster near areas that correspond roughly to the heart or forehead when viewed from the east, though flat summit zones also offer pragmatic stopping points regardless of symbolic association. Trails leading to many shrines are faint or absent today, perhaps erased by erosion, vegetation change, or lack of long-term traffic, reinforcing the idea of small-scale, occasional pilgrimages rather than regular communal use. And yet complexity endures. While most shrines appear singular and isolated, a handful exist in compact groups of 3 or more, close enough to suggest sequential construction or shared ceremonial purpose. Their spacing is inconsistent, their forms varied, resisting any simple categorization. Scattered finds, stone tool fragments, rare pottery sherds, charcoal flecks, appear near some shrines, suggesting brief activity such as offering placement, fire use, or tool sharpening. But their scattered distribution prevents defining one definitive pattern. From particular shrines, seasonal light interactions hint at further possibilities. At certain times of year, sunrise aligns with distant mesas, while at others the setting sun drops behind angled ridges and paints momentary bands of illumination across the stone rings. Such events are subtle, not universal across the mountain, leaving open the question of whether they were intentional observations or natural coincidences later noticed by those who visited. Modern documentation continues through detailed mapping and imagery, providing precise records of form, orientation, and topographic relationship. The resulting dataset is spatially rich yet culturally quiet, heavy with patterns light on explanation. What emerges is a landscape of recurring yet varied expressions. Stone rings, cairns of differing size, occasional lines of rock that bend like sentences written across the land. Individually modest, together they suggest a long-standing relationship between people and mountain, a conversation carried out in stone, returning over generations, subtle yet enduring. In this interplay of architectural restraint, environmental transformation, and cultural continuity, the shrines of Sleeping Ute Mountain remain tethered to wind-scoured ridges and summit flats with a quiet gravity. Their presence endures not through grandeur, but through persistence, stones placed thoughtfully, fasting in silence, resisting disappearance. They leave a record that gestures toward meaning without fully revealing it, poised in the threshold between evidence and mystery, where landscape, memory, and intention meet, but do not speak their story aloud. Mount Taylor Summit. At the crest of Mount Taylor, high on its volcanic crown where the massive summit unfurls into broad, wind-scoured fields of basalt and cinder, the summit shrines are scattered in forms modest yet unmistakably intentional. They appear first as low rings of stone, cairns, and linear alignments dispersed across the plateau, shapes that can seem almost incidental to an untrained eye, only slowly revealing their quiet deliberation when one walks among them, sensing the mountain's long-standing role as a spiritual anchor in the cultural geography of the Southwest. Standing more than 11,000 feet above the surrounding plains, Mount Taylor commands a view that sweeps for hundreds of miles. From its heights one can trace the distant Chicoan heartland to the northwest, the volcanic ridges of the Jemez Mountains rising beyond, and the pale desert plateaus of western New Mexico fading into a blue haze. The horizon feels not simply broad but gathered inward, as though the mountain sits at the center of a vast compass, a point from which the landscape radiates toward every direction. The shrines themselves vary subtly in form. Some exist as single stone circles, others as low cairns built from carefully selected basalt cobbles, while a few stretch out as elongated or horseshoe-shaped outlines that may once have framed ritual offerings or oriented themselves toward specific horizon features. Most are small, unassuming, unordered by monumental scale, suggesting acts performed by individuals or small groups rather than large congregations. Ethnographic traditions among several Pueblo communities reference this mountain, known in Carice as Tiesipin or Tsayapina, as one of the four sacred peaks that shape the world's orientation. These stories remain deeply meaningful, even though they do not identify who built every shrine scattered across the summit or how each was used. Archaeological surveys agree that many features long predate European arrival, yet their precise age remains difficult to measure, for few artifacts accompany the stones. The basalt is darkened by lichen, frost-shattered, worn smooth by wind and centuries of snowmelt, details that speak of time, but not a calendar. Minimal surface disturbance reinforces the conclusion that these features served ritual or symbolic ends, not domestic ones. Some alignments seem to interact with distant mountains. A number of cairns frame views toward the Chusca Range, others toward volcanic necks piercing the plains, and one elongated line points vaguely toward Mount Taylor's eroded outer slopes. Whether these lines held cosmological meaning, territorial presence, or seasonal significance remains unresolved. The summit's ecology complicates interpretation further. Its thin soils, bitter winds, summer lightning, and long winters destroy organic offerings quickly. If wood, feathers, seeds, or painted objects were placed here, they are long gone, leaving only stones, the most durable shadows of activities that were once richer, more sensory, perhaps musical or fragrant, with ritual materials now lost. The geology adds another challenge. The summit is naturally littered with fractured basalt, making the difference between intentional placement and natural scatter subtle. Yet in many shrines the stones are smaller, more uniform, carefully arranged into arcs or circles whose symmetry betrays human agency, even when the structures are humble. Some archaeologists argue that the summit functioned as a pilgrimage destination, a place reached after ascent, where offerings were left, prayers spoken, relationships reaffirmed. The evidence for this remains largely circumstantial, yet plausible. Others suggest the shrines may connect to agricultural or seasonal cycles, using the high vantage to observe shifting light or distant weather patterns. A few clusters occur near natural breaks in the plateau, where sunrise or sunset aligns with distant horizon notches, suggesting potential seasonal marking, though none are engineered precisely enough to confirm formal observatory intent. The near absence of ceramics, lithics, hearths, or domestic traces implies brief visits rather than long-term stays, episodes of presence rather than residency. Yet the story is not uniform. Some shrines appear heavily weathered, likely centuries old, while others seem fresher, sharper, hinting that use may have persisted or revived across generations. The shrines form not one focal point but many, a constellation rather than a temple, spreading from simple rings near the summit edge to elongated forms positioned around minor prominences. Whether this network reflects coordinated tradition or accumulated private acts is an open question. In early morning, when cloud banks sweep low and the wind carries mist across the plateau, the shrines seem to merge into the mountain itself. Stones shine with condensation, and for a moment it becomes easier to imagine rituals shaped by sound, light, and breath, the mountain as presence, not backdrop. Geological studies indicate that the summit surface has changed little in millennia, meaning many of these stone features may lie almost exactly where ancient hands placed them. Yet cultural meanings have shifted over time. Different peoples may have climbed this peak for different reasons, some to mark territory, some to invoke rain, others to speak with ancestors or acknowledge seasons. Their intentions overlap like faint echoes, forming a layered story that resists a single reading. What stands clear is the bond between shrine and mountain. The features are small, the stones unremarkable, yet their persistence across an exposed plateau where so little survives reveals a durable purpose. As modern mapping grows more precise, each cairn and ring becomes part of a widening mosaic, not evidence of a single ritual system, but testimony to many, woven across centuries. Here meaning resides lightly, shaped by human hands, yet completed by the vastness of sky, horizon, and the living presence of the mountain that holds them.